I was born September 13, 1931 in Clayburgh County Hospital, Kingsville, Texas, which I understand was a Sunday morning in 1931. My parents were John Charles Bowden and Vera Boley Bowden. My dad's parents, William and Anna, my dad's father was born and raised in Scotland, migrated to America in 1880. His mother was of German origin, but first generation German in the U.S. My mother's parents were born and raised in Texas, Bell County, near Temple, Belton, Central Texas, both born in 1880. Their ancestors had migrated from Scotland by way of Ireland. I think that's why they call them Scotch-Irish. And although my grandfather Boley, see we have Bowden Boley, we get this contradiction of pronunciations. But anyway, my grandfather Boley's ancestors came from Europe through Maine and settled in the 1700s. Eventually settled in Texas. I do know for a fact from records we've researched that some of his relatives were in the Civil War, with Mississippi cavalry. So they came apparently Maine, Mississippi to Texas. As I was growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. It was just a thing to do, and I was the only grandchild on my father's side. So I must say, in retrospect, I got a lot of attention because my father had two sisters who had no children. So in fact, one of them never married. So as a result, Aunt Evelyn, who was born in 1902, my dad was born in 1900. My Aunt Evelyn Bowden was born in 1902, and her sister Irma was born in 1903. And I stayed close with them until their death. In fact, by the time they eventually died, my dad was born in 1900, he died in 1986, and then that left his two sisters who were alone in Houston. And I looked after them, checked on them anyway, until through their deaths in 1990 and 92, I guess. So anyway, growing up, I got a lot of attention on that side of the family because I was the only grandchild. Kingsville got its start from the King Ranch. The King Ranch was established in the 1850s by a fellow named King. And he came there, bought up 1 million acres, and it became the largest ranch in the world. And so that was the center of activity for years. And then in 1903, the town was incorporated. I guess it started developing in the late 1800s. The town was incorporated in 1903. And the ranch, we called it, the King Ranch, was the principal employer. But of course, most employees and the cowboys were Mexicans. A lot of Mexican people down there before they come. And I guess they were Texas Mexicans, they were probably citizens. But nevertheless, the railroad was the second largest employer. The railroad was going, and I guess the railroad really got its start by shipping cattle. And then going on the Rio Grande Valley where they would ship fruit and vegetables from there. But coming north out of the Rio Grande Valley, the line went from Rio Grande Valley to Houston and beyond. It was Missouri Pacific Railroad. And so it became a terminal. They had a large general office, repair shops, and all that. My dad was in the general office as he was in the management side. During the Depression, Kingsville being a railroad division terminal, a lot of trains, particularly freight trains, came through where they would change crews. They were steam locomotives. They'd put water in the locomotives and all that kind of stuff. And we were about, I forget how many blocks from the railroad yard. And it was common in the 30s, mid-30s, throughout the Depression, hobos would travel on these freight trains by finding a place to get on there and travel and go places, and then the train stopped and they'd wander through town. And I can remember them coming and knocking at the door begging for a meal, asking for a meal. And my mother would generally make them a meal. They'd sit out in the backyard under a tree and eat a meal, and then they'd go on their way. And that just really, really bothered me. I couldn't understand. I was about 6, 7 years old. I couldn't understand. My dad was fortunate. With the railroad, he had a good job throughout the Depression, no problem. I guess some of my friends' parents weren't so fortunate. And I can remember growing up, some of my friends, I didn't realize at the time, but probably didn't have much. I grew up with boys and girls whose parents never owned their home and never had a car and may not have had a telephone. And in those days, even a lot of the streets in our hometown were dirt. They weren't all paved. But I couldn't comprehend the hobo, the beggar, That was really hard for me as a 6 or 7-year-old to understand how a man could be so desperate he'd have to come knock on your door and beg for a meal. But that was, of course, very common, as we find later as we read history, see photos, and that sort of thing. It seems though my mother seemed to want me to stay up with my friends, who all were about a year older than I was. Since I was born September 13th, and you had to be 6 by September 1st to start school, I was not eligible to start school when I turned 6. So my mother placed me in a private school that actually was run by the sister of a local first grade teacher. And I must say that in my part of town, there was only one elementary school. Kingsville was divided in quadrants. Northwest, northeast were, in those days, white. The northeast was Mexican, and the southwest was black. And we went to school with the Mexicans beginning in high school, and I never went to school with the blacks until I went in the Army many years later. It was very segregated back in those days, even for the Mexicans. Started in the private school with about 10 of us, and I think 2 of us were advanced right on into 2nd grade, so I skipped the 1st grade. And into the 2nd grade, then I caught up with my friends and peers that I had known in Sunday school and all the other places around town. Being a small town before World War II, there were about 6,000 people. We knew a lot of people in town. So I went through school, actually, in a few cases, from 2nd grade all the way through colleges with certain people, but certainly 2nd grade through high school with many of the same people who I got to know very well. In the 2nd grade, when I merged with them in the public school system, I guess I integrated fairly quickly. And I remember one of my first experiences being in a band called the Kitty Band. My dad especially was musically inclined, as was his father. My dad played a lot of instruments, and like the saxophone, clarinet, violin, and flute. And he played in the city band in various places he lived before, even after my parents were married. My grandfather was a big musician too, amateur purely. But anyway, so the next thing I had to be in a kitty band, which was a little band for 2nd graders, and I think I played the cymbals. That's about as far advanced as they got. Anyway, by 4th grade, I was playing, I got a clarinet, learned how to play the clarinet, and played it up into high school. I had the scouting experience through Cubs. I forgot Bobcat, Wolf Bear Line, Weebelow. And then when I was a scout, I was a den chief. Big thing. I always looked forward to summertime. We'd have a camp out for a week for the Cubs and other things. Anyway, that was big time. World War II, of course, changed lifestyles considerably. As I say, I was just 10 years old when World War II broke out. Things became rationed quickly. Gasoline was rationed. It was hard to go any distance as far as traveling and vacationing because you couldn't have the gasoline. My father worked for the railroad, as had his father, and so we had passes and we could travel free and easily on the railroad. But nevertheless, during World War II, the focus was the war effort, and moving around was very limited. And I did see my grandparents a lot in the summertime. My mother's parents lived in South Texas between Corpus and a few other towns near there, and my father's parents eventually settled in Houston. When I was 2 or 3 years old, they lived in Oregon. I was told, I know from pictures, we went out to visit them in Oregon, and then they eventually settled in Houston with my dad's 2 sisters. And so I would go to see my grandparents in summertime. And quite frankly, you couldn't get very far away from home with the gas ration as it was. And of course, along with that rationing, not only gasoline, but meat. And as I was telling someone the other day, chewing gum was unavailable. There are a lot of things that we take for granted today that were just not available in those days. Early in World War II, the U.S. government came in and built a naval air base outside of Kingsville. They just came in and bought these farms and took them and made an air base. It became an auxiliary of Corpus Christi, which was a major naval air base down that part of the country. And in the process, it was realized, because there was already a German threat of submarines off the Gulf Coast, that maybe they better start looking at the air. Now, of course, the sky was filled with Navy airplanes, and these were old, what we would call old, they were new then, propeller planes. But they had a thing called the Ground Observer Corps, And I volunteered, a couple of my buddies and I, at least one of them, and I volunteered to go up and do this. And we went up once a week on the roof of the courthouse, which was about 3 stories high, 4 stories high. And they had a little room up there with a telephone and a chalkboard. We fill in the blanks and binoculars, and we'd watch the skies. And anytime a suspicious looking airplane would fly by, we'd report it by immediate flash telephone call, which would go to San Antonio to a larger control center. That was quite an exciting experience, and I don't remember anyone other than this other boy my age and I doing that together with an adult. We'd go there and there'd be an adult with us. I got some little gold wings that I wish I could find them. I'm not sure where they are today. Little gold wings they presented me at a ceremony for being a ground observer, World War II. But I was only about 12, 13 years old. That would have been about 1943, 44. Let me say also that in those years there, 42, I've lost track. I started school in 1937, 1942. Texas, at least our county, expanded from an 11 to a 12-year system. When I started school, high school was 8, 9, 10, 11. And they expanded to a 12-year system. I was in high school 9, 10, 11, 12. And so I skipped a grade. And I skipped the 5th grade. So I missed the 1st and the 5th. And that's why I tell my wife, Janice, that you have to understand that I'm a little slow sometimes because I missed the grade in school. But anyway, I skipped the 5th. And thus, I was 16 when I graduated high school. I thought I was pretty mature at the time. But anyway, I started high school in 1944 during World War II. And of course, the war was over after my freshman year. In fact, it wasn't easy to find a job either. You know, it's a different world than we know today. Completely different world. Communication-wise, just AM radio, and mail was slow, and you know, just didn't have the rapid communication we have today. But anyway, toward the end of the war, I got a job with a buddy of mine at the golf course. My dad belonged to the country club, but hardly ever played golf. And he and I got jobs out there working on the greens and the grounds and cleaning clubs, and I started playing golf. And then from then on, played a lot of golf. Then my buddy, who deceased, had a job delivering milk. And he would ask me to substitute for him when he couldn't make it. And I happened to be delivering milk the day World War II ended. And during the war, the local dairy, which is also owned by the King Ranch, delivered milk with a horse and wagon, and had these metal wagons with places to put the cases of milk and pour ice on them, and pulled by a horse with rubber tires. And we would have a boy on each side, and we'd go down the street. Everybody got their milk. Most everyone got their milk delivered to their front door. And I'll never forget, I was delivering milk from a horse-drawn wagon the day they announced World War II. Everybody was excited. Well, by the time my sophomore year in high school began, you know, we're into the post-war. The veterans are coming back, and that was quite an experience. Things began to relax. They started rebuilding automobiles. They hadn't built cars since 1941. I know my dad decided he wanted a Buick. He had Chevrolets for years. Decided he wanted a Buick. So he put our name on the list. There was no Buick deal in Kingsville. We went to Corpus Christi. Put his name on the waiting list for a Buick. I'll never forget the day that came. We'd watch the newspapers every day because the newspaper would list who had bought new cars, and we knew they were getting close, getting close. Finally, they got to our name. We got a new car. Big deal, big exciting. And they went back into peacetime production of cars, trucks. You know, none of those things were built. All military effort during World War II. Started getting more supplies. They stopped the ration of meat, gasoline. People started moving around. And then we had all these veterans coming back to go back to college on GI Bill. And my experience in high school was that a number of student teachers I had been veterans just back from the war. So that was interesting for me to hear their stories. In fact, I was mentioning not long ago, one of them had been a glider pilot on D-Day when they flew in and landed those gliders on the longest day. Life's pretty simple back in those days. I don't, I mean, you conform, you didn't question, you just did what you're supposed to do. And then when I went off to college, especially, you obeyed, behaved, everything was regimented. I guess the only, high school, frankly, don't remember any big problem. I wasn't terribly sociable with the girls. I was a little shy, bashful. I didn't have many dates. I went to dances and a little bit, I interacted, but I wasn't big on the run around with girl stuff. And played a lot of golf and other activities in high school. I think I even did some homework, but those were the days where you didn't have a drink till you were 21. They'd never heard of drugs, and it was a different world. As far as I knew, there was no promiscuity. Everybody was straight line, straight air, Anyway, as far as I knew, that was that little cocoon I lived in. But anyway, I think when I went off to college, the challenges were, first of all, being around a lot of older people. I was pretty young, and had a lot of World War II veterans, and that competition was fierce academically, because many of these guys were already married, had children, and they were there for education. I was there to be in the cadet corps, be a soldier, be a this, that, and the other, had extracurricular activities, and that was a real challenge. Plus the hazing, the first year of college especially, a great deal of hazing, which was expected. That's just the way it was. It was a totally different life from what I had grown up with. Very regimented, very strict, very disciplined. And I guess I liked it. I took to it. I was active in church. We went to the First Presbyterian Church. I was baptized, raised there, Sunday school, all the works, all the way through. Involved in the church. Again, let me say that during World War II, there was little male leadership role setting, except for my own father, and other people's fathers who were old enough. Too old. My dad just missed World War I. He turned 18 just before it ended, and so he was too old for World War II. I guess if he volunteered, they'd taken him, but he was 41 in World War II. Anyway, most of my upbringing through that era was by women. My school teachers, my Sunday school teachers, my den mother were all women. It's still the case today in many cases. We grow up under the supervision of all women. As I was in high school, as the war ended, I had a Cocker Spaniel, and he was hit by a car, which happened a lot. You let pets run loose, and I lost several dollars, and that was terribly heartbreaking. My dad used to say the back of our yard was like a little cemetery. So many dogs buried back there. But anyway, there had never been a veterinarian in Kingsville except for the one at the King Ranch, whose principal duty was to handle their racehorses and all that stock. And so you could go out occasionally, on a special basis, go out and have him treat your dog, but not so. Well, anyway, new veterinarian out of college moved to Kingsville. So happened he went to the Presbyterian Church. He played golf at the country club. I got to know him. My mother got to know his wife. He was a young guy, comparatively speaking. But anyway, in the course of by about my sophomore year of high school, we were talking one day about it. He said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of interested in this veterinary medicine thing." Good. So by the beginning, I guess sometime late in my sophomore year, he asked me to start helping him to get some experience. And I did, and got great experience. He was the only veterinarian in town. He set up a little office. He built a room on the end. We didn't have clinics then like we do now. He built a room on the end of his garage and had his little office and examining. Well, I had experiences in doing everything. I'll bring on cats and dogs and going out and treating cattle out in the country and delivering calves in the middle of the night, all kinds of stuff. Great experience. And he became almost like another father to me because we did a lot of things together. And in summertime, when school started, then I'd go about my way. But he wanted to pay me and I wouldn't take any money. I thought I was getting too great an experience. So first thing I knew, I'd been playing golf and the pro approached me one day and says, "Anytime you want a lesson, just tell me and I'll give you a lesson." Complimentary. I think what happened is the veterinarian told him to do that between him and my dad. Anyway, Then I really got into golf, and then of course in the end, he was a much better golfer, and then he wanted to have me play with his wife a lot too. But anyway, we had a good time. They didn't have any children, and we did a lot of things together. And he I guess as I went in my senior, no, he was there when I graduated from high school. Right after I graduated from high school, we moved to Memphis, and I went up to see them several summers after that for a short visit in Memphis, Tennessee. Well, of course, I decided I wanted to be a veterinarian. So when I graduated from high school in 1948, I applied for Texas A&M. I always been interested in A&M. It was an all-male military college, and the only school in that part of the country that taught veterinary medicine. So I entered A&M in, I think it's 1st September 1948, just before I turned 17. Now, we had a big influx of World War II veterans still in the universities. The universities were overcrowded because of all these guys. I think we had the most highly educated generation in our history in those days after World War II, because these people came back and received the free education through the GI Bill. Anyway, because it was so crowded at A&M, we had to spend our freshman year some miles off the campus at an old Air Force base, living in tar paper shacks. But they would still bus us to the campus for a lot of things, particularly so we could be hazed, a lot of hazing. Yeah, well, it was, they said, make you a man. You know, I mean, you endure that stuff, that's what will make you a man. Let them be on your rear end with a board, have you standing attention and do all these things, and have you memorize all this stuff and recite all this stuff. That's supposed to make you a man. What it does, of course, it sorts out, it sorts out the good from the bad, or the bad from the good. But anyway, it certainly sorted out. When I started, freshmen went a week early for freshman orientation week, and they said, look on either side of you, because those guys are not going to be here. Only a third of you are going to make it. That's about right. Of course, when I finished my 4 years in '52, everybody went in the Army, went to Korea, a lot of them in the field, in fact. But I missed that. Well, at the end of my 4th year of college, which was my first year of veterinary school with 3 more to go, I was beginning to get burned out. The Korean War was going on. This was in late 1952. I knew I had to serve in the military. And I thought, man, I want to change. So I changed my major. I just wasn't in the mood to go 3 more years of school. And I changed my major, got a degree as quick as I could the next year in animal science. As I was entering my 5th year of college, I had some friends there who were all, actually, several of these guys were just in their 5th year of college. I think one of them came for a master's. And they were all going in the Army as well when they finished that training. And one of them was a pretty good friend of mine. We'd been in the same unit within the Cadet Corps our senior year. And he stayed on to get his bachelor's in petroleum engineering before he went in the Army. But anyway, his master's. But anyway, he says, you know, he said he had a girlfriend down in Port Arthur, Texas. Now, we were College Station. She's teaching school, and he said she's with 3 other school teachers. Said, why don't you come with me some weekend? We'll just go down and get you blind date. Okay. So I went down with him one weekend. The teachers were always having, the teachers there had a lot of socials. And actually they had socials with a bunch of engineers. There were a lot of guys who were engineers with the oil companies around there, petroleum or mechanical engineers. And so we went to one of their functions, and they got me a date with some gal, I couldn't even remember her name. But I went to the party, and I got more interested in this gal who had dated one of these engineers than I did the gal I had my date with, and that was Marion. And so I kind of thought she was more attractive and interesting than the one I had a date with. So the next day, got together her and my friend, this girlfriend, and we did, this is what we did. So then I saw her some more, and eventually things evolved. And by the next summer, as I was out of college, we were getting pretty serious. In fact, she came to my graduation in May of '53, and then had come to see my family. And she and her family lived in Houston, and they got to know my aunts, because my granddad died in July of '53. I remember they came to his funeral, but I don't think they really got to know him. But he was 95 incidentally when he died. But so it evolved that we were married in September 1953. Things just sort of clicked. And we were married in 1953, knowing that I had to go in the Army soon, and which we did. And I went in the Army, and it turns out that I had to go through a 4.5 month officer basic course, and when I finished, lo and behold, I was assigned to Fort Sill to a unit that was preparing to go to Germany. So went to Germany instead of Korea, and that's really what sold me on staying in the Army, because we had good treatment, good conditions, and the occupation force in Germany. When I graduated from college, no one would hire me because I was going in the Army. I could only be there a couple of months. I had had a summer job in high school working with the railroad. So I went back, they let me go back to that job, and I worked for the railroad. And we lived in Kingsville for a few months, and then went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I was working for the railroad. I was a carman apprentice. I wore overalls and one of those hats, and I was greasy, climbed under boxcars and built boxcars, and it was a different life. But it sure gave me let me say this. It had been a summer job in college, and it gave me an appreciation. And I got it actually because the guy in charge of that whole operation was a neighbor of ours. And it gave me an appreciation of the ordinary person, because when I went in the Army, I certainly dealt with a lot of them. And I think that was a good foundation, the summer job there, and then a couple of months after I got out of college, to work with the down-to-earth blacks, Mexicans, whites, real down-to-earth people, and see how they think, act, work, and what their work ethic is, what they think and do. And then when I went off the Army and started seeing these guys real in the Army, it was, I think, a good education. Anyway, that was an interim. I'll never forget, I guess I had to belong to the union. Well, I wouldn't belong one day if I had to, but I think I had to join the union or maybe be in something. And they gave me a letter when I left there promising me my job back when I came back to the Army, which is a big joke. that whole operation is long gone. 25 years ago, it closed down. Completely, all the facilities torn down and gone. So we went to Fort Sill, went through that course. Now, I've had a lot of experiences throughout my career that hinged around coincidences, we'll call them that, from a secular point of view. Coincidences, happenings just by chance, and a number of them around Texas Aggies. When I was in the basic course at Fort Sill, some of Marion's college girlfriends came up to see some others who were married to guys at Fort Sill. We all got together. And one of these girls, they all graduated from North Texas together in '52. One of these girls' cousin was an A&M graduate class 49. He was an aide-de-camp to the commanding general. And so we all spent the weekend together, going here, there, and yonder, doing things. And he asked me, he says, well, what are you going to do when you get out of the basic course? I said, I don't have the slightest idea. I said, I'd really like to go to one of these units that are training to go to Europe. Okay, well, sure enough, he went back to the headquarters and asked them to do that, and that's how I got that job. And that happened to me all the way through my career, off and on. Running into people like that, by the way, what do you want to do next? And taking care of it. That interesting. I guess that happened in civilian life too, but it started as a second lieutenant, that sort of thing happening, and it happened throughout my 30 years in the Army. Now, I guess I had a little bit of talent too that helped me get along, but it certainly helped to know people too.